Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Metzia. We are up to Parakeh Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai Veliyahu ben Burcha Israel, Chana bat Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Le'avdi ben Chaim Lechaim v'derefua, Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shah Chole Israel, and Achlama Mera Benamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The previous Mishnah taught that if a herdsman takes young animals into his care and he shares in both the profits and the losses, the investor must pay him separately for half the work and half the food he gives the animals. Our Mishnah teaches that this is not the case with fully grown animals. Shamin, para v'chamor v'chol davar shu oseh v'ochel Metzia. One may assess the value of a grown cow, a grown donkey, or any other animal that does work and thereby covers the expense of what it eats, and place it in the care of a herdsman for half the profits and losses. Assessing the value of an animal before giving it to someone to care for means that the caregiver will be responsible for half the losses. Since the herdsman can use these animals for work, that is considered as payment for taking care of and feeding the animals. In the previous Mishnah, however, he received animals that are too young to do any work. The investor must therefore pay him for his work and the feed. All offspring produced by the grown animals are considered profit, so the herdsman and the investor each own half of them. The Mishnah discusses when the herdsman may take his share of the offspring. The herdsman would prefer to divide the offspring as soon as they are born. This would free him from having to take care of the investor's half of the offspring, since he has no share in any increase in their value. He does not want to have to raise them. However, young animals must be cared for by an expert for the first part of their lives, 30 days for sheep and goats and 50 days for cattle. It is therefore understood that the herdsman will care for all the offspring, at least for that period. Mekom shenahagu lachlok et havladot miyad, in a place where the custom is to divide the offspring immediately, meaning as soon as they no longer need the care of an expert herdsman, cholkin, they may divide them immediately. Mekom shenahagu legadel, in a place where the custom is to have the herdsman raise young animals until they are grown, yigadelu, they may leave the animals with the herdsman to raise until they are grown, and the herdsman cannot force the investor to divide the offspring before then. Whenever people enter into a contract without specifying certain details of it, it is assumed that they mean to follow the local custom for such kinds of arrangements. They are therefore bound by the contract to keep those rules. Now, the previous Mishnah taught that if someone wants to give a herdsman calves or colts to raise in exchange for half the profits and losses, he must pay the herdsman for half his work and half the food. The Mishnah now cites a Tana who limits this requirement. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Shamin egel im imo, siach im imo. One may assess the value of a calf along with its mother, or of a colt along with its mother, and give them to a herdsman to raise for half the profits and losses without having to pay him anything extra for his work and the food he provides. These expenses are covered by the value of the mother's work and the child's manure. The mother is a fully grown animal and her work covers the expense of her food and care. Since the young animal nurses from its mother and follows her everywhere, the herdsman does not have to feed it or work extra to care for it, except for the occasional times when he has to carry it on his shoulder to bring it somewhere. That small effort is covered by the manure produced by the calf or colt, which the herdsman can use to fertilize his fields, because animal droppings were used as fertilizer. Now, the Tana of Mishnah 4, who disagrees with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, holds that the manure cannot be considered a payment by the investor. This is because people generally give up ownership of any manure left by their animals in someone else's property. Here too, the investor is not giving the calf's manure to the herdsman. He is simply giving up ownership of it. Therefore, although the herdsman takes it for himself, it cannot be considered a payment for his work. And the Mishnah continues. Well, before the Mishnah continues, the Rav says, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel concludes with another leniency in the laws of interest. Umafriz an sadeu, a person may increase the amount he charges for rent on his field in exchange for lending the renter money to improve the quality of the field. Ve'eno choshesh mishum ribit, and he need not be concerned about the extra rent being considered interest, because the increased charges on account of the improved quality of the field, which cannot be expected to produce more. For example, the person renting the field was paying 10 cores of wheat a year as rent. He then borrowed 200 zuz from the owner to make improvements in the field, for example, to buy extra fertilizer. He agrees to pay back the 200 zuz as well as 12 cores a year in rent, an additional 2 cores. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel permits this because he views the 200 zuz the owner gave the renter to improve the field, not as a loan to the renter, but as an investment by the owner in his field. It is the same as if the owner asks someone else to make improvements for him in his field to get it ready for the renter. Therefore, the extra 2 kurs the renter will now pay the owner is not interest on a loan, but part of an increased rent he is now paying for a much improved field. Since the improved field cannot be expected to produce a lot more than it did before, the renter is willing to pay the owner a much higher rent. And that is the end of Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav discusses another type of investment that is forbidden because of interest. And mikablin tzon barzel meIsrael. A person may not accept from a fellow Jew an investment with the tzon barzel arrangement, under which he guarantees to return the amount of the original investment plus half of any profits. Tzon barzel literally means iron sheep. However, the Mishnah is not specifically discussing an investment in sheep. A tzon barzel investment refers to any kind of investment in which a dealer guarantees to give back to the investor all the money he invested or the value of the items he invested, even if the investment fails and the money is lost. On the other hand, if the investment earns a profit, the investor will get a share of it. This is called a tzon barzel arrangement because, like iron, the original amount is preserved for the investor, and it is called sheep because these arrangements were originally made with investments in sheep. Mipnei shu ribit, the Mishnah says you cannot do this because the profit in this case is considered interest. One of the basic differences between an investment and a loan is that an investment carries with it a risk of loss, whereas a loan must always be repaid in full. Since the investor in this case is guaranteed to get back the amount he invested, even if the investment loses money, the investment is really a loan. Any profit he gets is therefore considered interest on the loan, which is forbidden between Jews. The Mishnah discusses the laws of interest on a loan between a Jew and a non-Jew. Aval mekablin tzon barzel min avdei kochavim. One may, however, accept an investment with a tzon barzel arrangement from non-Jews. Velovin mehen umalvin otan beribit. And in fact, one may actually borrow from them and lend to them with interest. The Torah states clearly that we may pay interest to non-Jews in Dvarim chapter 23 verse 21. And since the Torah says in Vayikra chapter 25 verse 36 that the reason we may not lend with interest is because we must be concerned for the welfare of our brother, our fellow Jew, and give him the loan for free, we understand that this does not apply to non-Jews who must be treated with decency but are not considered brothers, as the Torah writes in Yoredeah chapter 159, and the Mishnah says V'chen begel toshav. And the same holds true with the Gel Toshav. A Gel Toshav is a non-Jew who is allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael because he has accepted not to worship idols. Although the Torah generally requires us to be more concerned for the welfare of a Gel Toshav, as it says in Vayikra chapter 25 verse 35, the prohibition of charging interest on a loan applies only to a fellow Jew, as the Taz writes in Yoredeah chapter 159 Halacha footnote 1. Malvei Israel me'otav shel oved kochavim midat oved kochavim. A Jew may lend a non-Jew's money he borrowed from a non-Jew, for which he is paying interest, to another Jew and charge him interest on it, provided that this is done with the agreement of the non-Jew, who is then considered to be the person lending with interest to the second Jew. For example, Reuven borrowed money from a non-Jew who is charging him interest and he is ready to pay the loan. Shimon says to Reuven, instead of repaying the loan now, lend me the money, and when I repay you, I will also cover the extra interest the non-Jew will be charging you because of this delay. This is permitted if Reuven takes Shimon to the non-Jew and has him agree to this arrangement. In this case, we view Reuven as having repaid the loan to the non-Jew, who then took the money and lent it to Shimon. The Gemara on page 71b in Metzia adds that Reuven must actually hand the money to the non-Jew and have him pass it to Shimon in order for this to be permitted. Avalom midat Yisrael, but not if this is done only with the agreement of the first Jew, because the first Jew is then considered to be the one lending with interest to the second Jew. If Reuven does not take Shimon to the non-Jew and get his agreement and have him hand the money to Shimon, then Reuven is considered to be the one lending money to Shimon and he is forbidden to charge him interest on it. Although Reuven is paying interest to have this money, he may still not charge interest on a loan he is making to a fellow Jew. And that is an Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.